I stared at Eric, barely recognizing the man I had once loved. His sneer twisted his features into an ugly mask, and I felt a surge of anger unlike anything I'd experienced before. "Did that old bat finally croak?" he spat, referring to my father-in-law, George, with callous disregard. My hands clenched into fists at my sides, and I fought to keep my voice steady. "I just inherited $2 million. The words hung in the air, thick with tension, and I savored the way Eric's eyes widened in disbelief. He had always underestimated me, thinking I was just some meek little housewife. Well, he was in for a rude awakening. "You're lying," he scoffed, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his tone. I stepped closer, holding his gaze with a newfound fire burning within me. "George left everything to me and the kids. You, on the other hand, get nothing." Eric's face contorted with rage, and for a moment I thought he might lash out, but then he seemed to think better of it, his shoulders slumping in defeat. As he turned and stormed away, I couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph. For too long, I had allowed him to walk all over me, to treat me like a doormat. But those days were over. I was a different woman now, stronger and more resilient than ever before. And as I watched Eric's retreating figure, I knew that this was just the beginning. The road ahead might be long and difficult, but with my children by my side and George's legacy to guide us, we would persevere, we would thrive. And Eric? He would be nothing but a distant memory, a reminder of the strength it took to overcome adversity and emerge victorious. I sank into the plush couch, my mind drifting back to those early days with Eric. He had seemed like such a devoted son, always rushing off to help his ailing father, George. "I have to go check on Dad," he'd say, kissing me on the cheek before hurrying out the door. At the time, I had admired his dedication, his willingness to put family first. But looking back, I realized those absences had been the first cracks in the facade. "Where were you last night?" I asked one evening as Eric came stumbling in well past midnight. He waved a dismissive hand. "Dad needed me. You know how it is." I frowned but didn't press the issue. George was getting on in years, after all. Who was I to question Eric's devotion to his father? As the months passed, however, Eric's behavior became increasingly erratic. He would disappear for days on end, returning with flimsy excuses and a haunted look in his eyes. "I'm worried about you," I ventured one night as we lay in bed, his back turned to me. He didn't respond, and I reached out to touch his shoulder, only to have him flinch away. "Don't," he growled, and I recoiled as if struck. The next morning, I found him in the kitchen, nursing a cup of coffee. His eyes were bloodshot, his hair disheveled. "Eric, we need to talk," I began, but he cut me off with a sharp gesture. "Not now, Olivia," he snapped. "I have to go check on Dad." And just like that, he was gone, leaving me to wonder what had become of the man I had once loved. The kitchen was dimly lit, the only illumination coming from the pale moonlight filtering through the window. I sat at the table, nursing a cup of lukewarm tea as I waited for Eric to come home. When he finally stumbled in, the stale scent of alcohol clung to his clothes, and I fought back a wave of nausea. "Eric," I said, keeping my voice low and even, "can you come home a bit earlier these days? Maybe help out with your father?" His eyes narrowed, and he swayed slightly as he turned to face me. "What's that supposed to mean?" I took a deep breath, trying to quell the rising sense of dread. "It just seems like you're gone all the time lately. I thought maybe you could spend more time here with us." Eric's face contorted in rage, and before I could react, he had slammed his fist down on the table, making the dishes rattle. "I bust my ass all day at work, and you're complaining?" he snarled. "Maybe if you pulled your weight around here instead of sitting on your ass, I wouldn't have to be gone so much." I flinched at the venom in his words, tears stinging my eyes. "That's not fair, Eric. I take care of everything here while you're gone." He let out a harsh bark of laughter. "Yeah, you're a real saint, aren't you? Well, newsflash, Olivia, I'm sick of this shit. I'm sick of coming home to your nagging and your whining." Before I could respond, he had stormed out of the kitchen, leaving me alone with the shattered remnants of our once happy life. As I sat there, the tears streaming down my face, I realized that the man I had married was gone, replaced by a bitter, cruel stranger. And in that moment, I knew that our marriage was hanging by a thread that was rapidly unraveling. The days that followed were a blur of anguish and disbelief. Eric's outburst had shaken me to my core, and I found myself constantly on edge, waiting for the next explosion. It finally came one night as we were getting ready for bed. I had been folding laundry, lost in thought, when Eric stormed into the room, his face twisted in anger. "What the hell is this?" he snarled, holding up a lipstick-stained shirt. I stared at him in confusion. I don't know. It must have gotten mixed in with the laundry by mistake." Eric let out a derisive snort. "Yeah, right. You really expect me to believe that?" Before I could respond, he had closed the distance between us, his hand lashing out and striking me across the face. I cried out in pain and surprise, stumbling backwards as tears filled my eyes. "You think I'm stupid, don't you?" Eric hissed, advancing on me like a predator circling its prey. "You think you can cheat on me and I won't find out?" "Eric, please," I begged, my voice trembling. "I would never cheat on you. I love you." He paused then, a cruel smile twisting his lips. "No, Olivia, you don't love me. You never did." I shook my head desperately, but he cut me off with a dismissive wave of his hand. "I only married you because you were easy," he spat. "But now you're just a burden, a nagging, whining burden that I'm stuck with." The words hung in the air like a physical blow, and I felt the last shreds of my heart shatter into a million pieces. "Get out," I whispered, my voice barely audible. Eric's eyes widened in surprise, but I held his gaze, my resolve unwavering. "Get out," I repeated, louder this time, "and don't ever come back." For a moment, he looked as though he might argue, but then something in my expression must have given him pause. With a final, venomous glare, he turned and stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him with enough force to rattle the walls. And just like that, it was over. The life I had known, the man I had loved, had vanished, leaving me adrift in a sea of pain and betrayal. The air was thick with tension as I sat across from Taylor and Sam, my heart heavy with the burden of what I had to tell them. How do you explain to your children that their father had abandoned them, that the man they had once idolized was nothing more than a cruel, selfish stranger? "Mom?" Taylor's voice was laced with concern. "What's going on?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the onslaught of questions that was sure to follow. "Your father. He's gone." Sam's brow furrowed in confusion. "Gone? What do you mean, gone?" "He left," I said, the words catching in my throat. "He packed his things and walked out the door. He's not coming back." The silence that followed was deafening, and I could see the myriad of emotions playing across their faces. Shock, disbelief, anger, hurt. Finally, it was Taylor who spoke up, her voice trembling with barely contained rage. "That bastard," she spat. "How could he just abandon us like that?" I reached out and took her hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "I don't know, sweetheart. I wish I had answers for you. But the truth is, I don't understand it either." Sam had been quiet throughout the exchange, but now he looked up at me, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "What are we going to do, Mom? How are we going to make it without Dad?" My heart ached for my children, for the pain and confusion they were feeling. But in that moment, I knew that I had to be strong for them, that I had to be the pillar of strength they could lean on. "We'll figure it out," I said, mustering as much confidence as I could. "It won't be easy, but we'll get through this, together." A small, sad smile tugged at the corners of Sam's mouth. "You always know what to say, Mom." I returned his smile, though it felt hollow and forced. In truth, I was terrified, unsure of how we would navigate this new reality, but I knew one thing for certain. I would do whatever it took to protect my children, to give them the life and the love they deserved. A soft knock at the door startled us all, and I rose to answer it, my heart pounding in my chest. On the other side stood George, his face etched with sorrow and concern. "I heard what happened," he said, pulling me into a gentle embrace. "I'm so sorry, Olivia." As I clung to him, tears streaming down my face, he whispered words of comfort and reassurance, words that would become the lifeline we all so desperately needed in the days and weeks to come. "Don't worry," he murmured. "I have a plan. Everything is going to be all right." 1 year had passed since Eric's abrupt departure, and the pain of his betrayal had dulled to a persistent ache. Taylor and Sam had been my rocks, their unwavering support and resilience giving me the strength to carry on. So when the lawyer's letter arrived, summoning me to his office, I couldn't help but feel a sense of trepidation. What could George possibly want now? The lawyer's office was stuffy and oppressive, with an air of formality that made me instantly uncomfortable. I shifted in my seat as the lawyer cleared his throat, shuffling through a stack of papers on his desk. "Thank you for coming, Mrs. Martin," he said, his tone clipped and professional. "I'll get right to the point." He paused then, fixing me with a penetrating stare. "Your father-in-law, George Martin, passed away 2 months ago." The news hit me like a physical blow, and I felt the air leave my lungs in a rush. "George gone? How was that possible?" I don't understand," I stammered. "Why wasn't I notified?" The lawyer held up a hand, forestalling any further questions. Mr. Martin was quite explicit in his instructions. He wanted this matter handled discreetly and with the utmost confidentiality. He slid a thick envelope across the desk towards me. "This contains the details of Mr. Martin's last will and testament. I'll give you a moment to look it over." With trembling hands, I opened the envelope, my eyes scanning the pages inside. And then, slowly, comprehension dawned, and I felt the world tilt on its axis. George had left everything to me and the kids, his entire estate, including his vast real estate holdings and a significant portfolio of stocks and investments. We were millionaires. "But how?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Why would he do this?" The lawyer's expression softened ever so slightly. "Mr. Martin was quite clear on his reasons. He wanted to ensure that you and your children were taken care of, especially in light of recent events." I felt a rush of gratitude and sorrow intermingle, hot tears stinging my eyes. George had always been a rock in our lives, a steadying presence in the midst of chaos, and even in death he had found a way to protect us, to ensure our future. "There's one more thing," the lawyer said, drawing my attention back to him. "According to the legal statutes, Mr. Martin is now legally declared dead after 7 years of disappearance. His assets and estate have been transferred to you and your children." "Eric." The name hung in the air like a specter, a reminder of the pain and betrayal that had torn our family apart. But in that moment, sitting in the stale confines of the lawyer's office, I felt a newfound sense of purpose take root within me. George had given us a second chance, an opportunity to start anew, and I would be damned if I let Eric or anyone else tarnish that gift. With a deep breath, I squared my shoulders and met the lawyer's gaze, a steely determination burning in my eyes. "Tell me what I need to do," I said, my voice firm and resolute. "It's time to take control of our lives." The doorbell rang, the shrill sound piercing the tranquility of our new home. I exchanged a questioning glance with Taylor as Sam rose to answer it. "Mom?" His voice held a note of trepidation. "You might want to come here." My heart sank as I rounded the corner, coming face to face with the last person I ever expected to see again, Eric. He looked haggard and unkempt, his clothes rumpled and stained, but his eyes still held that same arrogant glint that had once made my blood boil. "Well, well," he drawled, a sneer curling his lip. "Look at you, living the high life." I straightened my spine, determined not to let him rattle me. "What do you want, Eric?" He let out a harsh bark of laughter. "What do I want? I want what's rightfully mine, that's what." Taylor stepped forward then, her eyes blazing with fury. "You have no rights here? You abandoned us, remember?" Eric's gaze flickered towards her, and for a moment I saw something akin to shame flicker across his features. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by that familiar sneer. "Abandonment or not, I'm still entitled to a share of that inheritance," he said, jabbing a finger in my direction. "George was my father, after all." I felt a surge of anger rise within me, hot and unstoppable. "George was more of a father to us than you ever were." I spat. "He loved us, and he wanted to make sure we were taken care of, something you were never capable of doing." Eric's face contorted with rage, and for a moment I thought he might lash out, but then his shoulders slumped and he let out a defeated sigh. "So that's it, then?" he muttered. "You're just going to cut me out completely?" I met his gaze, unflinching. "You're a ghost, Eric. You abandoned us, left us to fend for ourselves. As far as the law is concerned, you're legally dead." His eyes widened at that, and I could see the realization dawning on him. He had no claim, no recourse. George had effectively erased him from our lives, leaving him with nothing. "You can't do this," he whispered, his voice tinged with desperation. But I had already made my decision, the weight of George's sacrifice and trust steeling my resolve. "I can, and I am," I said, my voice ringing with finality. "Now get out, Eric, and don't ever come back." For a long moment he simply stared at me, his expression a mixture of disbelief and defeat. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away, disappearing down the street like a specter fading into the mist. And as I watched him go, I felt a sense of triumph unlike anything I had ever known. A victory, not just for myself, but for George, for Taylor and Sam, for all those who had suffered at Eric's hands. It was over. The chapter of my life that had been defined by his cruelty and betrayal had finally, mercifully, come to a close. And in that moment, I knew that the future was ours for the taking, a future forged not from bitterness or vengeance, but from love, resilience, and the unbreakable bonds of family. The years passed, and with each one, the distance between our new life and the painful memories of Eric's betrayal grew wider. We had settled into a comfortable routine, Taylor excelling in her college classes and Sam thriving in high school. And then, one day, I ran into Eric again. Quite literally, in fact. I had been leaving the grocery store, arms laden with bags, when I collided with a figure hurrying in the opposite direction. "Watch where you're going, lady," a gruff voice snarled. I froze, the bags slipping from my grasp as I found myself staring into the haggard, unshaven face of my ex-husband. For a moment, neither of us spoke, the air thick with tension and unspoken history. Then, slowly, recognition dawned in Eric's eyes, and his expression shifted from anger to something akin to shock. "Olivia?" he whispered, as if he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. I straightened my spine, refusing to let him rattle me. "Eric?" He raked his gaze over me, taking in my tailored clothing and immaculate appearance. "You look different." "Life has a way of changing people," I replied coolly. His eyes narrowed, and I could see the bitterness etched into the lines of his face. "Yeah, I'll bet. Must be nice, living it up on my father's money." I shook my head, a sad smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. "Is that what you think this is? Some kind of revenge fantasy, rubbing your face in our success?" Eric didn't respond, but the hard set of his jaw told me all I needed to know. "You're wrong, Eric," I continued. "This isn't about revenge or getting back at you. This is about moving on, about building a life that honors the sacrifices George made for us." I paused, letting my words sink in. "You had your chance, Eric. You could have been a part of this, a part of our family, but you threw it all away, and for what? A moment of selfish gratification?" Eric flinched as if I had struck him, and I knew my words had found their mark. "You've made your bed, Eric," I said, my voice tinged with a sadness I hadn't expected. "Now lie in it." With that, I bent to gather my scattered groceries, leaving him standing there, a silent, solitary figure in the midst of the bustling parking lot. As I drove away, I caught a glimpse of him in my rearview mirror, shoulders slumped in defeat, and in that moment, I felt a strange, bittersweet sense of closure wash over me. Eric's story was one of selfishness and squandered potential, of a man who had let his own demons consume him. But ours, mine, Taylor's, Sam's, was a tale of resilience, of rising from the ashes of betrayal to forge a new path, a new destiny. And as I looked ahead to the bright future that stretched out before us, I knew that we had emerged from the darkness not just unscathed, but stronger, wiser, and more unified than ever before. Eric's reckoning had come and gone, now it was our turn to truly live.